Elara Vance didn't ask for permission to save him. She didn't check if he was a friend or a demon. She simply gripped the collar of his heavy leather duster and heaved with every ounce of strength she had left. The door slammed shut against the night, sealing the silence back inside. Elara collapsed back against the wood, her chest heaving, staring at what she had just dragged in from the dark. He was massive. Even crumpled on a rug, covered in a layer of fresh snow, he took up too much space in the small, fatherless room. "Toby," she whispered, her voice breathless and urgent. "Take Bessie to the back room. Close the curtain. Do not come out until I say." "Is he dead, Mama?" the boy asked, his voice trembling. "No," she said, "but he's bleeding on my floor. Go, now!" Elara had buried a husband 3 years ago. She knew the smell of death, and this man smelled like it, mixed with pine, horse sweat, and the metallic tang of fresh blood. But as she reached for the knife on her belt to cut away his frozen coat, she realized this was no ordinary drifter. The clothes were expensive. The gun belt slung low on his hips held a peacemaker with a handle of ivory, not wood. And when she peeled back the layers of wool and linen, stripping him to the waist to find the wound, her hands faltered. It had been 1,000 lonely nights since Elara had seen a man, and she had never seen a man like this. Even in the grip of a fever, his body was a weapon carved from granite. Broad shoulders tapered down to a waist that showed no sign of the hunger that plagued the rest of the territory. Scars wrote a violent history across his ribs, silver lines of old knife fights and barbed wire, but they only seemed to emphasize the raw, masculine power radiating from him. Elara felt a flush rise up her neck that had nothing to do with the fire. She told herself she was just looking for the wound. She was a liar. She dipped a rag into the basin. The water turned pink as she wrung it out. She should have been afraid. A man like this didn't end up shot and half frozen on a widow's porch by accident. He was trouble. Elara Vance didn't ask for permission to save him. She didn't check if he was a friend or a demon. She simply gripped the collar of his heavy leather duster and heaved with every ounce of strength she had left. The door slammed shut against the night, sealing the silence back inside. Elara collapsed back against the wood, her chest heaving, staring at what she had just dragged in from the dark. He was massive. Even crumpled on a rug, covered in a layer of fresh snow, he took up too much space in the small, fatherless room. "Toby," she whispered, her voice breathless and urgent. "Take Bessie to the back room. Close the curtain. Do not come out until I say." "Is he dead, Mama?" the boy asked, his voice trembling. "No," she said, "but he's bleeding on my floor. Go, now!" Elara had buried a husband 3 years ago. She knew the smell of death, and this man smelled like it, mixed with pine, horse sweat, and the metallic tang of fresh blood. But as she reached for the knife on her belt to cut away his frozen coat, she realized this was no ordinary drifter. The clothes were expensive. The gun belt slung low on his hips held a peacemaker with a handle of ivory, not wood. And when she peeled back the layers of wool and linen, stripping him to the waist to find the wound, her hands faltered. It had been 1,000 lonely nights since Elara had seen a man, and she had never seen a man like this. Even in the grip of a fever, his body was a weapon carved from granite. Broad shoulders tapered down to a waist that showed no sign of the hunger that plagued the rest of the territory. Scars wrote a violent history across his ribs, silver lines of old knife fights and barbed wire, but they only seemed to emphasize the raw, masculine power radiating from him. Elara felt a flush rise up her neck that had nothing to do with the fire. She told herself she was just looking for the wound. She was a liar. She dipped a rag into the basin. The water turned pink as she wrung it out. She should have been afraid. A man like this didn't end up shot and half frozen on a widow's porch by accident. He was trouble. But as she ran the damp cloth over his collarbone, tracing the hard line of muscle down his bicep, fear was the second thing she felt. The first was a terrible, aching curiosity. His skin was burning hot, radiating a fever heat that warmed her cold fingertips. She washed the grime from his neck, her knuckles brushing against the rough stubble of his jaw. He groaned, a low rumble deep in his chest that vibrated through the floorboards, and Elara froze. He didn't wake. He just turned into her touch, seeking comfort in the delirium of his pain. Elara sat back on her heels, her breath hitching. She looked at his face. Dark hair fell over a forehead that was currently knotted in pain. His lashes were long, casting shadows on high cheekbones. He was beautiful in the way a storm is beautiful, dangerous, wild, and utterly captivating. "Stop it, Elara," she whispered to herself. "You're a nurse tonight, not a schoolgirl." She forced her eyes away from the expanse of his chest and focused on the blood leaking from his side. The bullet had passed through, a clean shot. He was lucky, or maybe he was just too stubborn to die. She worked quickly, cleaning the wound with whiskey she'd been saving for a bad winter and binding his ribs with strips of clean linen. She had to lift him to wrap the bandages around his back. He was heavy, dead weight against her, his skin searing hot against her arms. When it was done, she didn't cover him fully. The fever needed to break. She pulled a quilt over his legs, leaving that impressive chest rising and falling in the firelight. Then she took his gun from the holster, placed it high on the mantel, and sat in her rocking chair with her rifle across her lap. The wind howled outside, burying the cabin in snow, ensuring no one would come looking for him tonight. They were trapped, just Elara, her children, and a dangerous stranger who looked like a fallen angel sleeping on her rug. Dawn broke with a silence that only snow can bring. The stranger awoke all at once. There was no grogginess, no confusion. One moment he was still, and the next his hand shot out, gripping the leg of the chair next to him. Elara jerked awake, her rifle clattering as she straightened. "Where is it?" he rasped. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "It's on the mantel," Elara said, leveling her rifle. "Unload it, and you'll stay right there if you want to keep the blood inside your body." The stranger blinked, his eyes focused on her. They were blue, a startling, icy blue that seemed to pierce right through her defenses. He looked at the rifle in her hands, then at the bandages on his chest, and finally up at her face. A slow, crooked grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You got a steady hand, ma'am," he said. "Most folks would have let me freeze." "Most folks have common sense," Elara replied sharply. "I'm seemingly lacking in it lately. Who are you, and who shot you?" He saw her look. He saw the way her eyes darted at his bare shoulders and quickly away. The grin widened just a fraction. "Name's Silas. As for who shot me, let's just say it was a disagreement over property lines." He was lying. Elara knew it instantly. Men didn't get shot with high-powered rifles over fences. "Well, Silas," Elara said, "you're in the Vance cabin, and you're not going anywhere until that storm breaks, so you'd better give me a reason not to drag you back out into it." Silas opened his mouth to answer, but then his gaze shifted past Elara to the small, frightened face peeking through the bedroom curtain. Elara saw the change in him instantly. The charm vanished, his jaw tightened. He looked at the boy, at the poverty of the room, and the widow holding the gun. A shadow passed over his face, something that looked dangerously like guilt. "You have children," he said quietly. "Two," Elara answered, "which is why I don't take chances with strangers." Silas sank back on the pillow, closing his eyes as if the sight of the boy caused him more pain than the bullet hole. "I can pay for my keep, ma'am," he whispered. "I have money in my saddlebags. Just don't put me out, not yet." For 2 days the storm raged, trapping them in a domestic intimacy that felt fragile as glass. Elara fed him broth. She changed his bandages, her hands learning the landscape of his scars by heart. And he watched her. He watched her chop wood. He watched her soothe the children. He watched her with a brooding intensity that made the hair on the back of Elara's neck stand up. On the third evening, the fever broke. Elara was at the basin, scrubbing a plate just to keep her hands busy. She felt him before she heard him. The air in the kitchen shifted, becoming heavier, charged with his heat. "You're working too hard, Elara," a voice rumbled right at her. "I didn't tell you my name," she breathed. "In the family Bible, by the chair." He reached around her. Elara stopped breathing, but he didn't grab her. He reached for the heavy iron skillet hanging on the wall, lifting it easily despite his injury. Their arms brushed. It was a glancing touch, fleeting, but it sent a jolt through Elara that nearly dropped the plate. She turned to face him, trapped between the basin and his massive frame. He looked down at Elara. The playfulness was gone. His blue eyes were dark, dilated. He looked at her mouth, then her eyes. "Let me help," he said, his voice dropping to a low warning. "You saved my life, Elara, but you have no idea what a mistake that might be." The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Silas didn't move away. He stayed right there, looming over her, his breath warm against her cheek. "I need to check the stock," Elara whispered, ducking under his arm before she did something foolish. She grabbed her heavy coat from the hook by the door. "The storm hasn't let up," Silas warned, turning to watch her. "Animals still need to eat, even if the men inside don't deserve it." She slammed the door behind her, leaning against the rough wood for a moment to catch her breath. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She wasn't just running from him. She was running from herself, from the traitorous warmth that bloomed in her chest every time he looked at her. She trudged to the barn, feeding the few scrawny cattle she had left, but her mind was back in the cabin. Specifically, it was on the heavy leather coat Silas had been wearing when she found him. She had hung it to dry near the hearth. Something had fallen out of it when she dragged him in. A letter. She had kicked it under the rug in her panic and forgotten about it. Elara dropped the pitchfork. A cold dread, colder than the wind outside, settled in her stomach. She rushed back to the house, bursting through the door in a flurry of snow. Silas was sitting by the fire, whittling a piece of wood for Toby. He looked up, surprised by her sudden return. Elara ignored him. She crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to her knees by the door and throwing back the corner of the rug. There it was, a thick envelope, sealed with red wax, the seal of the Northern Railway Company. Elara's hands trembled as she broke the seal. She read the first line, then the second. By the time she reached the bottom, the air had left her lungs. Eviction notice. Property, Vance Homestead. Enforcement officer, Silas Thorne. Authorized use of force. She stood up slowly. The paper crinkled in her fist. When she turned to face him, the warmth was gone from her eyes. "Silas Thorne," she said. The name tasted like poison. Silas stopped whittling. He saw the letter in her hand. He didn't try to deny it. He didn't even flinch. He just set the knife down, his face closing off like a shuttered window. "Elara," he started, his voice low. "Don't," she hissed. She grabbed her rifle from the wall, leveling it at his chest. "You came here to throw us out into the snow, to take the roof from over my children's heads." "I was sent to make an offer," Silas said, standing slowly, his hands raised. "The railway wants the land. They pay well." "They pay in blood," Elara shouted. "I know how the railway works. You scare widows, you burn barns, and when that doesn't work, you send men like you." Silas took a step forward, ignoring the barrel of the Winchester pointed at his heart. "You're right. That's exactly what I am. That's what I was coming to do." "Then why are you still here?" Elara demanded, tears stinging her eyes. "Why didn't you let me freeze? Why did you fix the roof? Why are you carving toys for my son?" Silas stopped. He looked at the half-finished wooden horse on the table. Then he looked at Elara, his blue eyes filled with a conflict that looked painful. "Because I didn't know. I didn't know this place had a heartbeat until I woke up on your floor."
Before Elara could decide whether to shoot him or scream, a sound cut through the howling wind outside. It wasn't thunder, it was the sharp crack of a gunshot. Glass shattered in the back room. Toby screamed. Elara spun around just as a second shot tore through the front window, embedding itself in the wall inches from Silas's head. "Get down!" Silas roared. He tackled Elara, throwing them both to the floor as a hail of bullets shredded the front of the cabin. "The children!" Elara screamed, scrambling toward the back room. "Stay low," Silas ordered. He crawled toward the mantel, grabbing his peacemaker. He checked the cylinder. 5 rounds. "Who is that?" Elara cried, clutching Toby and Bessie, who had run into the main room in terror. Silas peered through a crack in the door. Through the swirling snow, he could see dark shapes on horseback surrounding the cabin. 5 of them, maybe 6. He turned back to Elara. His face was grim. "It's the rest of my crew," he said. "They didn't think I was coming back, so they came to finish the job without me." "Your men?" Elara stared at him in horror. "They were," Silas corrected. He snapped the cylinder of his gun shut. "But they don't take kindly to failure, and right now I'm the only thing standing between them and this house." He looked at Elara. The first time he saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. "Give me the rifle, Elara," he said. "Why should I trust you?" she spat, hugging her children tighter. "You're one of them." "Not anymore," Silas said. He looked at the door, where the wood was beginning to splinter under the assault. "Right now, I'm the only man you've got, and I'll be damned if I let them touch a hair on your head." Elara looked at the door, then at the man who had lied to her, charmed her, and now was offering to die for her. She made a choice. She slid the Winchester across the floorboards. Silas grabbed it. He didn't smile. He just nodded once, a silent vow. Then he kicked the table over to create a barricade and positioned himself at the window. "Take the kids to the cellar," Silas commanded, his voice turning into the steel of a soldier. "And Elara?" She paused at the cellar door, looking back at him. "Keep your head down," he said softly. "I'm gonna make this right." Elara ushered the children into the dark, damp safety of the root cellar. As she pulled the heavy wooden door shut, the sound of gunfire erupted above them, deafening, violent, and terrifyingly close. She sat in the dark, holding her weeping children, and listened to the stranger she had saved, fighting a war for her home. She prayed to a God she hadn't spoken to in years. She prayed that the bullet she had pulled out of him wouldn't be the last thing he survived. Above ground, Silas Thorne was a storm of his own. He moved with a lethal grace, firing, reloading, and moving again. He knew these men. He knew how they thought. He knew they were cowards who relied on fear. But they didn't know he was inside, and they didn't know he had something to fight for now. A man kicked open the front door, silhouetted against the snow. Silas didn't hesitate. He dropped him with a single shot to the shoulder. "Go back," Silas shouted into the wind. "This land is protected." "Protected by who, Thorne?" a voice shouted back, a jagged, cruel voice Silas knew well. It was Miller, his second in command. "You gone soft on us, boss? Falling for the widow?" "I'm giving you one warning, Miller. Turn around, or I'll bury you in the snow." A laugh answered him. Then a torch was thrown. It landed on the porch, the dry wood catching instantly despite the cold. "Burn it down," Miller shouted. "Burn 'em all out." Smoke began to curl under the doorframe. Silas swore. He looked at the cellar door. He looked at the fire spreading on the porch. He was out of time. He couldn't hold him off from inside. He had to go out there. He checked his ammo. 2 rounds left in the rifle, 3 in the pistol. 5 bullets against 5 men. He took a deep breath, the smell of smoke filling his lungs. He thought of Elara's face when she washed his wound. He thought of the boy peeking through the curtain. "Well," he muttered to himself, pushing off the wall, "it's a good day to die." He kicked the burning door open and stepped out into the blizzard, his guns blazing.
The blizzard swallowed Silas the moment he stepped off the porch. The wind tore at his duster, blinding him with ice, but the fire from his Colts burned bright against the gray dark. He didn't fire wildly. Silas Thorne didn't waste lead. He dove behind the heavy oak water trough just as the air where he had been standing filled with whistling death. Wood splinters rained down on him as bullets chewed into the trough. "Give it up, Thorne," Miller's voice screamed over the wind. "You're bleeding out. I can smell it." Silas gritted his teeth, ignoring the fire in his side where his old wound had torn open. He counted the muzzle flashes in the dark. 1 near the barn, 2 by the fence line. Miller was in the center, bold as brass, using his horse for cover. "Come and get me then," Silas roared back. He popped up, firing 2 shots in rapid succession. A man by the fence cried out and fell into a snowdrift. 4 left. Silas dropped back down as a fresh volley of gunfire chipped away at his cover. His hands were steady, but his vision was swimming. The blood loss was catching up to him. He broke open the cylinder of his right-hand gun, dumping the spent casings into the snow. His fingers felt thick and clumsy with the cold as he thumbed fresh cartridges from his belt. 1 for the widow, 1 for the boy, 1 for the girl. He snapped the gun shut. He wasn't fighting for a paycheck anymore. He wasn't fighting for the railway. He was fighting for the 3 heartbeats hiding in the cellar beneath his feet. Underground, the sound of the war above was muffled, a terrifying rhythmic thudding that shook dust from the ceiling beams. Elara sat in the dirt, her arms wrapped around Toby and Bessie. Every gunshot made her flinch. Every pause in the firing made her heart stop. Was he dead? Was it over? "Mama," Toby whispered, pressing his face into her shoulder, "is the bad man gone?" Elara looked at the heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs. Smoke was starting to seep through the cracks. The porch was burning. If Silas fell, the fire would consume the house, and the men outside would consume whatever was left. She looked at the rifle Silas had shoved into her hands, the Winchester, cold steel and oiled wood. She realized then that she was done hiding. She was done being the victim in her own home. "Stay here," she told the children. Her voice didn't shake. "Cover your ears. Count to 100. Do not stop." "Mama, no!" Bessie cried, grabbing her skirt. Elara kissed the girl's forehead, fierce and quick. "I have to go help him. Be brave." She pushed the children back into the shadows and climbed the stairs. She put her shoulder to the door and shoved. The cabin was a hellscape of smoke and cold. The front door was gone, kicked off its hinges, and the fire on the porch was licking at the frame, casting wild, dancing shadows across the room. Snow swirled in, hissing as it hit the flames. Elara stayed low, crawling across the floorboards toward the broken window. She peered over the sill. The yard was a chaos of wind and shadow. She saw the muzzle flashes first, then she saw him. Silas was pinned down behind the water trough. He wasn't moving. A man in a dark coat was walking slowly toward him, a shotgun leveled at the trough. It was Miller. "End of the line, boss," Miller shouted, racking the slide of his shotgun. "I'm gonna put you down like a lame horse." Silas tried to rise, to lift his pistol, but his arm collapsed under him. He was spent. Miller grinned, raising the shotgun. Elara didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She leveled the Winchester on the windsill, took a breath, and let it out just like her father had taught her 20 years ago. Crack! Miller spun around, his shotgun blasting harmlessly into the sky as he clutched his thigh. He fell into the snow, screaming a curse that was lost in the wind. "What the hell?" another man shouted from the barn. "They got a second shooter."
Silas looked back at the house, shock registering on his blood-streaked face. He saw Elara in the window, smoke curling from the barrel of her rifle. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, a shared look of desperate survival. Then Silas moved. With Miller down, the center was open. Silas forced himself up, roaring with the last of his strength. He charged not away from the fire, but toward it. He fired as he ran, closing the distance on the man by the barn. The man panicked. He fired wide, turned to run, and took a bullet in the back. "Retreat!" someone shouted from the darkness. "Let's go! It ain't worth it!" The remaining two men didn't need to be told twice. They had come to bully a helpless widow, not fight a demon and a sharpshooter. They scrambled for their horses, their courage breaking under the strain of the blizzard and the body count. Silas didn't chase them. He reached Miller, who was trying to crawl toward his dropped shotgun. He kicked the weapon away into the dark. He stood over his former second-in-command, chest heaving, his pistol aimed at his man's head. "I told you," Silas rasped. "I told you to turn around." Miller looked up, pain and hate in his eyes. "The railway will send more. You can't stop it, Thorne. You're a dead man." "Maybe," Silas said, "but not tonight." He didn't shoot him. He turned his pistol around and slammed the heavy butt of the handle into Miller's thymel. The man slumped into the snow, unconscious. Silence returned to the valley, sudden and ringing. Silas stood there, swaying in the wind. The adrenaline that had held him upright was draining away, leaving only the cold and the pain. The gun slipped from his fingers. His knees hit the snow. "Silas." He heard his name. It sounded like it came from a great distance. He felt hands on him, small, strong hands, grabbing his coat, pulling him. "Get up," Elara was saying, her voice thick with smoke and tears. "Damn you, Silas Thorne, get up. You don't get to die after all that." He tried to help her, but his legs wouldn't work. She dragged him. God knows how she did it, but she dragged him back up the steps, away from the burning porch, and into the snow-filled ruin of the living room. Then she left him. He watched through half-closed eyes as she grabbed a blanket and beat at the flames eating the door frame. She shoveled snow on the wood, screaming in frustration, fighting the fire with the same ferocity she had fought the men. Slowly the orange glow faded, the smoke thinned, the fire died, hissed out by snow and willpower. Elara dropped the blanket. She turned to him, her face blackened with soot, her hair wild. She looked like a Valkyrie. She crawled to him, pulling his head into her lap. "Silas," she whispered, "I'm here. I'm still here." The sun didn't just rise the next morning, it shattered the dark. The storm broke at dawn, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of pristine, blinding white. Inside the cabin, it was cold. The door was boarded up with scrap wood, but the fire in the hearth was roaring. Silas lay on the bed this time, and Laura hadn't let him argue. She had stitched the new wound in his shoulder, a graze, messy but not deep, and rebandaged his side. He was covered with quilts, weak as a kitten, but alive. He watched her moving around the room. She was sweeping up broken glass. The children were sitting at the table, eating oatmeal, casting shy glances at him. "Toby," Silas rasped. The boy jumped. He looked at his mother. Elara nodded. Toby slid off his chair and walked carefully to the bedside. "Did you kill the bad men?" Toby asked, his eyes wide. "I chased 'em off," Silas said softly. "They won't come back, son, I promise." He reached under his pillow. His hand shook slightly as he pulled out the wooden horse he'd been carving. It was finished now, rough but clearly a stallion, legs rearing up. "Here," Silas said, "for keeping your sister safe." Toby took the horse like it was made of gold. A slow smile spread across his face. "Thanks, Silas," he whispered. Elara sent the children out to fetch snow to melt for water.
The blizzard swallowed Silas the moment he stepped off the porch. The wind tore at his duster, blinding him with ice, but the fire from his Colts burned bright against the gray dark. He didn't fire wildly. Silas Thorne didn't waste lead. He dove behind the heavy oak water trough just as the air where he had been standing filled with whistling death. Wood splinters rained down on him as bullets chewed into the trough. "Give it up, Thorne," Miller's voice screamed over the wind. "You're bleeding out. I can smell it." Silas gritted his teeth, ignoring the fire in his side where his old wound had torn open. He counted the muzzle flashes in the dark. 1 near the barn, 2 by the fence line. Miller was in the center, bold as brass, using his horse for cover. "Come and get me then," Silas roared back. He popped up, firing 2 shots in rapid succession. A man by the fence cried out and fell into a snowdrift. 4 left. Silas dropped back down as a fresh volley of gunfire chipped away at his cover. His hands were steady, but his vision